Hi Booktube, and once again it is the most wonderful time of the year. It is Victober. Hi everyone, Kate here with one of my most beloved videos to film every year, and now for the fourth year in a row to announce Victober. In case you are new to Booktube or had not yet heard of Victober, Victober is a month-long read-along taking place during the month of October, where we read all things Victorian. So plays, poetry, nonfiction, novels, just pretty much anything Victorian we will be reading during the month of October. And Katie from Books and Things created this readathon a few years ago, and I am really pleased to be one of the co-hosts along with Lucy from Lucy the Reader and Ange from Beyond the Pages. So the general qualifications that we give for Victorian literature is something that was written between the years of 1837 and 1901, and the authors being from the countries of Northern Ireland, Ireland, England, and Scotland and Wales. Unfortunately, this does exclude Jane Austen, since her books were published from 1811 to 1818. But there are so many wonderful, amazing authors from this period of time. It was just an amazing, unusual, and unique time for art to be created. So I love it so much. It's just one of my absolute favorite time periods to read literature from, and I'm so excited to explore even more and hopefully find some new Victorian favorites. So in order to participate in Victober, all you have to do is to read one Victorian novel. That's all you have to do. If you have read one Victorian novel, be it 150 pages or 700 pages, you have participated in Victober. But for the Hermiones out there who would like some challenges, some ways to feel like you're really achieving a Victober participation, you're just like a straight A student, we do have 5 challenges for you. And I'm really looking forward to telling you about these. These are just so fun to come up with each year and see the creativity and the other hosts. And the first challenge is Lucy's challenge. And that is to read an underrated Victorian classic published in the same year as your favorite Victorian classic. So even if you don't just have one favorite Victorian classic, you could take a look at the several years that have some of your favorite books and see if anything pops out to you that you would like to read. I think this is a really great challenge, especially to kind of give you a sense of the year that your favorite book was published in. And you can look that up on Wikipedia. It has lists of books published in every year, and yeah, I think you'll find some interesting things. Next is Katie's challenge, and that is to read a Victorian novel with under 250 pages and / over 500 pages. So if you want to read a really slim one that's under 250 pages, that you can tick that off for this checklist. Or if you just want to read one that's over 500 pages, you can check that off doing the challenge. But if you want to do both, if you really want to go big for Victober, you can read both the slim one and the big one, whatever your preference is. And Katie will have some recommendations for that challenge on her announcement video. The next challenge is mine, and that is to reread a Victorian novel. So I must say, some of the most rewarding Victorian reading that I have done has been rereading. I think that when you first come upon a book, you are really taking in the writing style, the flow of the plot, the symbolism that's in there, the characters, and the general sense of time. What kind of a book is it? All of this, and if there's twists in it, taking all that in for the first time. When you go back in with eyes that have read this story before, you're going to be seeing things that you wouldn't have noticed before, and that can make the reading experience an even richer and more rewarding reading experience than you expected to have. This is one that it's hard for me to give recommendations on, but I will talk about the books that I thought about rereading for this challenge, because there are so many Victorian books that I love, but these ones I'm about to talk about are ones that when I think about them, I think, oh, someday I'm going to reread that book. I really want to reread it. And the first is one that was from just last year that I read during Victober. It became a new favorite Victorian novel. Loved it so much. And that is Deerbrook by Harriet Martineau. This is about two sisters, Hester and Margaret. Let me fact check. Yes, Hester and Margaret. I wanted to make sure I got their names right. And they move into this small community of Deerbrook. It's a very insular community. They are from, it's not Manchester. It's another Northern English, like industrial town. Birmingham. They're from Birmingham. And they move to this really small town. Circumstances bring them there. And it's just kind of how their arrival, these two eligible young women, shakes up the town and the events that unfold from that. But what I loved about this was how it is so incredibly focused on the relationships of the characters with one another and how their relationships have kind of a ripple effect towards the plot. I really love, Harriet Martineau was a sociologist, and so you can really see this come out with how she shows these different people relating to one another and how that affects the community at large. Just talking about this makes me really yearn to reread it. So that's one that I really will reread, if not this year, at some point. Next is Lorna Doone. For any of you who have read Lorna Doone, I do recommend a reread. I have not reread it yet myself, but I really very much want to. It is a rather plot-heavy book for me to like, but it just very much charmed me. This is about John Ridd and his deep and abiding love for Lorna Doone. And there is a lot of kind of feuding amongst different family groups that's in this. It's a woodland setting, and something about that just feels very like fairy tale-ish. I love that feel to it. And there's just event after event after event that happens in this. It is very plot heavy, but like I said, it's very charming. And so I did still feel like I got to know the characters. They might not be the most like three-dimensional characters, but there's something about this story, again, that's just so charming, and I love it. It's a very slim volume, so this could qualify for Katie's challenge of less than 250 pages, is Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. Cranford, I think Cranford was the first Elizabeth Gaskell that I read. I know some people are kind of let down by this because they go in thinking it's just going to be this kind of grand story because they've seen the BBC miniseries, which is fabulous. And it is a lot more vignette-y than comes across. But I think just since I love Elizabeth Gaskell's writing style so much, I still loved it. It's got so much humor in it. There's a cow that's sunburned. There's a cat that eats a lace collar that they're trying to, like they have it in buttermilk and they're trying to make it look more cream colored. And so they're chasing the cat, trying to get the lace collar back. Yes, it's just got a lot of funny things going in it, and also just really neat to see kind of a window of a more rural town and the traditions that the community holds on to there. Next, another one that I have not reread, or wait, no, I've reread it one time, and that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is just, I remember just being so incredibly swoony while I read this. Now, I will say though, I don't know if I would want my life to necessarily be like Jane Eyre, but boy, does it make for good reading. So Jane Eyre is the story of the title character, Jane Eyre, kind of her life story, and through different circumstances, she needs to go find a way to support herself. So she becomes a governess and is sent to Thornfield Hall, where things are not always as they seem. And even knowing the twists, you know, going into it the second time, rereading it, it's just so well written. And it's so stereotypical to say Jane Eyre, but it's just so good. There's a reason so many people talk about it. So Jane Eyre is one I thought about rereading. Then the next one will be a Dickens, and that is Great Expectations. This was maybe my third Dickens that I read and shot up as my favorite. Now it is kind of tied with Dombey and Son and David Copperfield, but I love this book. And this was the first classic that I had read where The plot was just so masterfully crafted. Things that happen at the end, how they tie into things from the beginning, and I didn't see it coming at all. It's so well told. I think Great Expectations is kind of hit or miss with people. Like, I don't really hear people feeling kind of meh about it. I feel like people either are being like, I really didn't like Great Expectations, or I loved Great Expectations. I love Great Expectations and definitely want to reread it at some point. Then Middlemarch, and I have this on my list because the first time I read Middlemarch, when I finished it, I was just relieved to be done with it. I did not want to read it ever again. I thought, I am just so done. But I don't know what it is. Something about it just called to me again. And so after I read it the first time, I had actually rewarded myself with this beautiful, what is it called? The Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition that has deckled edges. I love deckled edges. I know they're not for everyone, but I like them. So anyhow, and it is such a quiet book upon the first read. And there were so many things that I didn't even realize were happening during my first read. The second time I went in, these characters and how much they internalized their emotions, something about it was just so incredibly gripping. And I felt like I got to know the characters so much better and that they were so worth my time thinking about them again, going through this book a second time. It is just an unbelievably well worth your time book. And that George Eliot is one of the more kind of serious Victorian authors, and so the reading might not come as easily, but the reward that you get, I think, is very worth it. Okay, then moving on. I'm not going to talk about rereading Victorian novels without talking about Wives and Daughters. I'm sorry if you're tired of hearing me talk about this book. I just don't know if I will ever tire of it. Wives and Daughters is by Elizabeth Gaskell, who is my favorite Victorian author, and this is the story of Molly Gibson. This is a story that is kind of quiet, and as you start reading it, you really feel like not much is happening, and it just gently pulls you in and slowly makes you fall in love with these different characters, with Molly and with her father and maybe with her stepsister. It's interesting to hear different people talk about her stepsister Cynthia. I kind of think a lot of people have a different take on her, which is why she makes such a fascinating character. And just the turn of events that happens in this, it just sweeps you away. It is an utter delight to read. I reread it at the beginning of this year, actually. So that was my third time reading it. So I was like, all right, maybe I will choose a different book to reread since I have just reread this at the beginning of the year. And next, another Gaskell, and one that I'm nervous to reread. So I don't know if I'll pick it for this year because I don't want it to not live up to my memory of it. And that is Sylvia's Lovers. I read this during the second Victober. Or was it the first Victober? It may have been the first Victober. I think it was the first Victober. Anyhow, all to say, I was so swept up by this. This is like Elizabeth Gaskell, Thomas Hardy, and Emily Bronte just had a book baby. And it's amazing because it has Elizabeth Gaskell's characterization and her really approachable writing style. But the landscape is such a huge part of this. It's set in, what is the town in the name of this? It's based on Monkshaven. It's called Monkshaven in the book. It's based on Whitby, which is a very northern fishing village. So there's a lot of, most of the community, that is how their income is provided. And just this really tight-knit community. And Sylvia is kind of feeling a bit trapped, in this small community. And she wants to see, she wants more for her life than just like the typical housewife deal. So just because of how gripped I was by the plot, I had no idea what was going to happen. I do think Sylvia possibly doesn't make the strongest heroine, but I know that she really intrigued me and that so much of it was written so beautifully. This is where Elizabeth Gaskell's landscape writing really shines. So for those reasons, I want to reread it at some point. I just loved how capital R romantic it was. Okay, and then the last book that I know I'll reread at some point, and I reread last year, so I thought, all right, I won't reread it again this year, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I adore this book. Katie from Books and Things just has said multiple times on her videos, it is not the romantic love story that Hollywood makes it out to be, but it is a fascinating, fascinating character analysis about young love gone wrong and what you do to people who hurt you. These characters, you are just thrown into their world, and you feel like you are right there with them. They feel so flesh and blood, and the way this very gothic landscape, it's just such an immersive reading experience. And if I loved it less, I could talk about it more, as Mr. Knightley from Emma says. So yes, I will be rereading this over and over and over again at different points. So those are the ones that I thought about rereading. Again, it was hard for me to recommend because I don't know what all of you have read. Okay, then let me flip my page for the next challenges. The next one is Ange's challenge, and that is to read a Victorian book by a female author. And a bonus aspect of this challenge is if you read by a new to you author. So for those of you looking for some Victorian novels written by women, you can look at the announcement video on Ange's challenge, and I'm sure she'll have some great recommendations there. The last challenge, being the group challenge, is to read by candlelight. So at some point during Victober, we want you to feel extra Victorian and just sit down with some candles on and feel like you are in the Victorian era even more so. So I thought that would just be, I think that'll be really fun to kind of take you back to yesteryear. And we aren't saying read a whole book because that might get a little tiring to have to rely on candlelight to read a whole book. But for part of it, I thought it would be fun. Okay, then the group reads. We had another Victober election. And it was neck and neck between Mary Elizabeth Braddon and Oscar Wilde. Then we also had George Gissing and Margaret Oliphant. We put polls up on Goodreads and on Twitter. So if you follow Katie from Books and Things on Twitter, you will have seen the poll. And if you're part of the Victober Goodreads group, you will have seen the Goodreads poll. But Oscar Wilde won. So I think that'll be a nice change, to read some plays. We're going to read some of his plays from the typical novel reading. So, which we all do plenty of that during Victober. So yes, this will be something different. And we are going to be reading A Woman of No Importance and The Importance of Being Earnest. I have not read any of Wilde's plays. I'm very much looking forward to this. And I think I'll be pairing audiobooks with physical copies, following along with the physical copies. But I think that will just be spectacular. And then those are all of the challenges, the group reads. As per usual, I will be making a playlist of all of your wonderful Victober TBRs that are coming out. So I'll make a Victober 2019 playlist. I am so excited to see what everyone's going to be reading. I will be updating like mad on my Instagram, which is No Compliments to Your Mother. And just use the hashtag Victober. And I will be following along. I can't wait to show you what I will be reading, see what you will be reading. If you don't have a booktube or an Instagram, you can leave in the comments the Victorian novels that you think you'll be reading. And I will be back for another Victober video soon, but hopefully before then, a couple more videos.